Chapter 6 Captain Banfield Explains. The hours passed but slowly. The man who had first answered my summons brought me some food, but to all my arguments he remained obdurate.
"Captain says you're to stay here," he responded. "Now if I let you out, he'd put me in irons. Old Banfield ain't a skipper to be trifled with, I can tell you."
So I remained there, filled with gloomy thoughts and wondering where I was being taken, and what possible interest Messrs. Hanway, the owners of the Petrel, could have in my forcible abduction. I sat there, helpless and puzzled, until it grew quite dark, and then my head feeling heavy, and my limbs exhausted on account of the drug that had been so ingeniously administered to me, I threw myself down, and the motion of the vessel soon lulled me to sleep. The long green waves were sweeping past in the sunlight when I again opened my eyes, and from the porthole I could see a large steamer with a pair of red and black funnels in the distance, leaving a long trail of smoke behind her. Soon, however, she was beyond my range of vision, and I could do nothing except sit there and review the whole situation. The beautiful face of my murdered wife arose ever before me. It seemed to cry to me for vengeance. I was her husband, and I alone knew the truth. Yet it was evident that I was still in the hands of enemies, and imprisoned there I could do nothing. The day passed, and fortunately I found myself feeling better. The effect of the noxious drug was slowly wearing off, yet the strain upon my nerves was terrible, and the imprisonment, coupled with uncertainty as to the future, was driving me to desperation. A third day passed, much as the second. The only person I saw was the sailor who brought me food from the cook's galley in the morning and at evening, badly cooked sailor's fare that I could scarcely touch. As the sun was sinking, we suddenly approached a blue line of coast, and continued to skirt it until it became swallowed up in the night mists. Then, wearied again, I lay down to sleep. I was awakened by the sudden stoppage of the engines, and found that it was already day again, and that we were in calm water. Outside my porthole was a flat stone wall which shut out everything. But shouting and tramping sounded above, and I knew that we were being made fast at a quay. My opportunity for escape had arrived. If only I could break open the door and slip up on the deck unobserved, I might regain my freedom. Now I had, during the past 2 days, made a careful examination of my cabin and the door, during which I noticed that, supporting the box-like berth beneath, was an iron stay, the lower end of which was flattened out so that it could be made easily screwed down to the floor. The screws were loose, like most of the fittings of the badly kept craft. Therefore, after some little trouble, I managed to remove it and found that I held in my hand a capital crowbar. Presently I managed to work the thin end between the door and the lintel, and then, throwing my whole weight against it, endeavoured to force the outer bolt from its fastenings. My first attempt was abortive, but I saw that the screws were giving way. Therefore I continued my efforts carefully so as not to attract attention, until, of a sudden, the socket of the bolt flew off and the door was burst open. Then, holding my iron bar in self-defence, I stepped along to the foot of the ladder by which I climbed on deck. The vessel, it seemed, was not a very large one, and of a particularly dirty and forbidding appearance. With care I crept around the deck-house unobserved until I reached the gangway, and just as my presence was discovered by the captain, I slipped across it nimbly, and was on the quay amid a crowd of labourers, custom officers, and the usual motley assemblage which gathers to watch an arriving vessel. I heard the skipper shouting violently, and a couple of the crew started in pursuit, but, taking to my heels, I soon outdistanced them, and after some little time found myself walking in a large handsome street, lined with fine shops and showy cafes. I was in Christiania. I inquired in French of several persons the whereabouts of the British consulate, and about an hour later found myself in the private office of the representative of Her Majesty, a tall, good-looking man in a cool suit of white linen. To him I related the whole circumstances. He listened, but smiled now and then with an air of incredulity. I told him of the murder, of the manner in which my life had been twice attempted, and of the remarkable circumstances of my abduction. "And you say that you were taken on board the Petrel," he said reflectively. "I know Captain Banfield quite well. He is a strict disciplinarian, an excellent sailor, and is held in high esteem by his men. We must hear his explanation of the affair at once. If what you have said is true, it is certainly most remarkable." I drew the trinket with the golden chain from my pocket, together with the crumpled note, and showed them to him. "Strange," he remarked. "Most extraordinary. I'll send down to the docks for Banfield at once." And, calling a clerk, he dispatched him in a cab. In the meantime, in response to his questions, I gave him the most minute details of the startling affairs, as well as the ingenious manner in which Beryl Wynd had been murdered. I knew that the story, when related, sounded absolutely incredible, but it was equally certain that the consul, at first inclined to doubt my statement, had now become highly interested in it. I remarked upon the extraordinary mystery, and its features which seemed to stagger belief. "But you are a medical man of considerable attainment, I notice from your card," he resumed. "I have no reason to doubt your story. It is rather a matter which should be strictly inquired into. Any person abducted from England in the manner you have been has a right to seek protection and advice of his consul." And we continued chatting until, after a lapse of nearly half an hour, the captain of the Petrel, wearing his shore-going clothes, was ushered in. "Good morning, sir," he exclaimed, addressing the representative of the Foreign Office, but taking no notice of my presence. "You sent for me?" "Yes, Captain," the consul responded rather severely. "Kindly sit down. There's a little matter upon which you can throw some light. You know this gentleman?" And he indicated myself. "Yes, sir, I know him." "Well, he has lodged a very serious complaint against you, namely that you have held him a prisoner on board your ship without any just cause, and further that, contrary to the regulations of the Board of Trade, you carried him from port while in an unconscious condition." The skipper remained quite unabashed. "Well, sir," he answered, "as I've already told the gentleman, I only acted under strict orders from my owners. I suppose they'll take all the responsibility?" "No, the responsibility rests upon yourself. You've held a master's certificate a good many years, and you are fully acquainted with the Board of Trade regulations." "Of course I don't deny that," the other responded. "But my orders were quite precise. And now tell me, how came this gentleman on board your ship?" "To tell the truth, sir, I don't know exactly. We were lying in the St. Catherine docks, and my last evening ashore I spent at home with my wife over at Victoria Park. We were to sail at 4 o'clock in the morning, but I didn't get aboard before about 4:10. When I did so, orders from the owners were put into my hand, and I was told that there was a passenger who had been brought aboard, lying asleep below. Here's the letter." And he drew it from his pocket and handed it to the consul. The latter read it through, then, with an exclamation of surprise, handed it over to me. It certainly increased the mystery, for it was from the office of the owners, Messrs. Hannaway Brothers, in Leadenhall Street, ordering that I should be taken on the round voyage to the Baltic, well cared for, but kept locked in a cabin, as I had developed homicidal tendencies. "The gentleman, whose name is Dr. Colkirk," continued the letter, "is subject to fits in which he remains unconscious for some hours. Therefore there is no cause for alarm if he is not conscious when he reaches you. He is under an hallucination that he has been witness of some remarkable crime, and will no doubt impress upon you the urgent necessity of returning to London for the prosecution of inquiries. If he does this, humour him, but on no account allow him to go on deck or to hold conversation with anyone. The gentleman is a source of the greatest anxiety to his friends, and we may add that, if the present orders are strictly carried out, the gentleman's friends have promised the payment of a handsome bonus to yourself. We therefore place him on board the Petrel, in preference to any other vessel of our fleet, because of the confidence we entertain that you will strictly carry out your orders." And the letter was signed by the firm. "It seems very much as though the owners had some object in sending you aboard," observed the consul. Then, turning to the skipper, he asked,
How was the gentleman brought on board?" "He was brought in a private carriage about 6 o'clock in the evening, my men say. 2 gentlemen carried him on board. The dock police stopped him, but they told the constable that the gentleman was drunk." "And when you received the letter, what did you do?" "Well, I put him in the second mate's cabin, left him alone till 2 days later, when he came to. Then I just carried out my orders." "Where are you bound for?" "A round trip. Stockholm, Riga, St. Petersburg, Drammen, Kristiansund, and home." "That means a month." "More. 6 weeks. Your owners, therefore, were anxious that the doctor should be absent from England during that time. There is some mystery here, on the face of it. Dr. Colkirk has related to me a very remarkable story, and the most searching inquiry should be instituted." "Well, sir," Banfield said apologetically, "I hope you don't consider my conduct bad. I've only carried out my orders to the letter. You see, I didn't know that the gentleman was on board until we'd actually left the quay, and the letter says quite distinctly that he's subject to fits, therefore I let him remain quiet until he regained consciousness." Then turning to me, he added, "I trust, sir, that you'll accept my apology." "That's all very well," interposed the consul, "but you know that you did entirely wrong in sailing with an unconscious stranger on board." "I admit that. But you see I had my orders, sir." "Who delivered them to you?" I inquired. "The 2 gentlemen who brought you on board," he responded. "Have any of your men described them to you?" "They only said that they were both well-dressed and about middle age." "They were, without doubt, the tempter and his accomplice. The conspiracy had been conceived and carried out with amazing ingenuity." "And they brought the doctor on board and delivered this letter?" "Yes, sir. They afterwards re-entered the carriage and drove away." "Well," said the consul, "the only course I see is for the doctor to take this letter, return to London, and seek an explanation of your owners." "No, sir, I shan't give up the letter. It's written to me," demurred the captain. "But it is in my hands," responded the consul. "I am making inquiries into this affair, and I shall act as I think best in the interest of all parties concerned. The letter is your property, certainly, but recollect that this affair may prove very awkward for your owners. Therefore take my advice, Captain, and assist this gentleman in his inquiries." "I protest against you keeping the letter." "Very well. I will see that your protest is forwarded to your owners," replied the consul, and he handed me the letter, saying, "Your best course, doctor, is to return by Wilson boat to Hull. She sails this afternoon at 4. Then go down to Leadenhall Street and make inquiries. It seems a very strange affair, to say the least." "It is entirely unaccountable," I said. "There seems to have been widespread plot against me with a single motive, the concealment of the murder of Beryl Wynd." "But in that case, why not let me telegraph to Scotland Yard?" suggested the consul, as the sudden idea occurred to him. "They would watch the house until your return. Today's Tuesday. You'll be in London on Thursday night or on early Friday morning." The proposal was an excellent one, and I gladly accepted. Next instant, however, the bewildering truth flashed across my mind. I had not hitherto realized my position. My heart sank within me. "Would that your suggestion could be carried out," I replied. "But truth to tell, I don't know the house, for I took no notice of its situation, and am unable to tell you the name of the road." "Oh, how extremely unfortunate. London is a big place, and there are thousands of houses that are outwardly the same. Didn't the servant who called at your surgery give you the address?" "No, she gave it to the cabman, but I did not catch it. Men of my profession take little heed of the exterior of houses. We make a note of the number in our visiting books, that's all." "Then you really haven't any idea of the situation of the house in which the tragedy occurred?" "None whatever," I replied. A moment later a further thought occurred to me, and I added, "But would not the registry of marriages give the address of my bride?" "Why, of course it would," cried the consul excitedly. "An excellent idea.
Return to London as quickly as you can and search the marriage register. From that I'm certain you'll obtain a clue. Chapter 7. My New Patient. On Friday morning I entered the office of Messrs. Hanway Brothers in Leadenhall Street, and after a short wait was accorded an interview with the manager. I demanded, of course, an explanation why I had been shipped away from London in such a summary manner, whereupon he apparently regarded me as a lunatic. "I really had no knowledge of the affair," he replied, smiling incredulously. "Do you actually allege you were taken on board the Petrel and kept imprisoned in a cabin by Captain Banfield? A most extraordinary story, to say the least." I told him of the inquiries made by the British consul in Christiania, and added, "I have here the captain's written orders from your firm signed by yourself," and I produced the letter. He glanced it through eagerly and then carefully scrutinized the signature. "This renders the affair far more mysterious," he exclaimed with increased interest. "The letter paper is certainly ours, but the whole thing is a forgery." "It is not your signature." "Oh, no, certainly not, only a clumsy imitation." And taking up a pen, he wrote his signature and handed them both to me for comparison. At once I saw that several of the peculiarities of his handwriting were absent from Banfield's orders. "This typewriting is done by a different machine to ours. We use Barlocks, while this has probably been written by a Remington," he went on. "Besides, look at the edge of the paper, and you'll see that it is badly cut. It is, without a doubt, a sheet out of several reams that were delivered by the stationer some months ago, and were rejected by me because of the careless manner in which the pages had been cut." Then he touched his bell, and the chief clerk appeared. To him he showed the letter, and without a moment's hesitation he declared it to be a forgery. Without going into details of the events of that memorable night, I described how I had recovered consciousness to find myself at sea, and the strict obedience of the captain to the orders he had received. "Well, all I can conjecture is," declared the manager, much puzzled, "that you have fallen the victim of some clever conspiracy. The details show that there was some strong motive for your abduction, and that the conspirators well knew that Banfield remained at home until the last moment before sailing. They were, therefore, unable to put you on board during his absence. The forged orders, too, were brief and well to the point. In fact, were just as they might be if sent from this house. No, depend upon it, there has been some very ingenious plotting somewhere." I remained with him a short time longer. Then, realizing the uselessness of occupying his time, I withdrew, and in further prosecution of my inquiries drove to the Doctor's Commons. Here, after certain formalities, I gained knowledge which seemed of distinct advantage. Of the official there I learned that the special license by which I had been married had been applied for by Beryl herself, and shown a copy of the application signed by her, Beryl Wynd. I read the document through, and its contents held me in amazement, for it prayed that a license might be issued for the solemnization of marriage in the church of St. Anne's, Wilton Place, between herself and Richard Dawes Colkirk, bachelor, Doctor of Medicine, of 114 Rowan Road, Hammersmith. Besides, it was dated nearly a fortnight before, soon after I had accepted Raymond's invitation to be his guest. But my main object in making inquiries at the registry was to discover my wife's address, and in this I was successful, for in the same document I found that she had described Beryl Grace Wynd, spinster of 46, Earl's Court Road, Kensington. I had at least gained knowledge of the house in which the tragedy had been enacted. "When the young lady called to make this application, were you present?" I inquired eagerly. "Yes, I saw her." "What was she like? Could you give me a description of her?" "She was good-looking, elegantly dressed, about middle height, if I remember aright." "And her hair?" "It was a color rather unusual," answered the man, peering at me through his spectacles. "A kind of golden brown." The description was exact. Beryl had been here and of her own accord applied for a license to marry me. The mystery increased each moment. "Was she alone?" I inquired. No, her father was with her. How did you know he was her father? He introduced himself to me as such. Major Wind. Major Wind! I ejaculated. But Mr. Wind is not an officer. What kind of man is he? Of military appearance, round-faced, good-humoured. Old? Certainly not. Scarcely 50. He wore a single eyeglass. The description did not answer to that of the tempter, but rather to that of Tatterset. The truth seemed plain. The Major had posed as Beryl's father and had given his consent to the marriage. The registry official, a little dry-as-dust individual who wore steel-rimmed spectacles poised far down his thin nose, endeavoured to learn who and what I was, but I merely replied that I was making inquiries on behalf of certain friends of the lady, and having satisfied myself by another glance at the signatures, I bade him good afternoon. After a hasty lunch in a bar at the foot of Ludgate Hill, I set forth by the underground railway to Earl's Court, and experienced but little difficulty in discovering number 46. I stood on the right between Park Terrace and Scarsdale Villas, but at a single glance I saw that it was not the house to which I had been conducted. The latter had been a big, substantial mansion with a spacious portico supported by 4 huge pillars, whereas this was a small, old-fashioned house of perhaps 10 rooms. Nevertheless, I walked up the garden path and rang the bell. My summons was answered by a neat maid who called her mistress, an elderly lady, and the latter declared that she had lived there 5 years and had never heard of the name Wind. "Have you ever left your house furnished?" I inquired. "Never," she responded. "But the name is somewhat uncommon, and you ought to have no difficulty in finding the address." "I hope sincerely that I shall," I answered, and apologizing for disturbing her, went down the steps, feeling that my mysterious wife had purposely given a false address in order to place any inquirer on the wrong scent. Along to the corner of Kensington Road I strolled slowly, debating in my mind the best course to pursue. I turned into a public house at the corner, and asked to see a London directory, which I searched eagerly. But there was no such name as Wind among the residents, neither could I find it among those of people living in the suburbs. I called upon the vicar of St. Anne's, Wilton Place, and saw the register that I had signed, but the officiating clergyman had been a friend of Wind's, and he did not know his address. It seemed suspiciously as though the name of Wind was an assumed one. A false address had been given by the Major at Doctors' Commons, and in all probability the surname was likewise false. Fatigued, hungry, and dusty, I at last found myself once again in Rowan Road before the door of Bob Raymont's house, and entered with my latchkey. Old Mrs. Bishop came forward excitedly to meet me. "Oh, Doctor!" she cried. "Wherever have you been all this week? I felt certain that something had happened to you, and yesterday I got my daughter to write a line to Dr. Raymond. Oh, but I'm so glad you are back again, sir. It's given my daughter and me such a fright. We imagined all sorts of horrible things like those we read of in Lloyd's and Reynolds." "Well, I'm back again, Mrs. Bishop," I answered as carelessly as I could, "and I'm confoundedly hungry and tired. Give me a cup of tea and a chop, there's a good woman." And I ascended to Bob's cosy little den from which I had been so suddenly called 7 days before. So Mrs. Bishop had written to Bob. No doubt he would be very surprised that I had disappeared and left the practice to take care of itself. He would certainly consider that my gratitude took a curious form. Therefore I decided to send him a wire, telling him of my return and promising explanations later. I cast myself wearily into the big leather armchair, and sat plunged in thought until the old housekeeper entered fussily with my tea. "Well," I asked, "I suppose there have been no new patients during my absence?" "Oh, yes, one, sir." "What was it?" "A lady, sir. She came in about noon on the 2nd day of your absence, and she said she wished to consult you. I told her you'd been called out 2 days ago, and that you had not returned. She asked when you would be in, and I said I didn't know for certain. So she called again later, and seemed very disappointed and anxious. She came next day, but as you were still absent she left her card. Here it is." And Mrs. Bishop took a card from the tray on the side table and handed it to me. Upon it was the name Lady Pierrepoint Lane. Was she young or old? Rather young, sir, not more than 30, I think. She was dressed in deep mourning. And you have seen nothing more of her? I inquired interestedly. There's no address on the card. She came in again 2 days ago, and finding you had not returned, left this note, telling me to give it to you on arrival. And the woman fumbled behind the mirror on the mantel-shelf and handed me a dainty note, the envelope of which bore a neat coat of arms. The heading was 88 Gloucester Square, Hyde Park, and the brief note ran, Lady Pierrepoint Lane would esteem it a favour if Dr. Colkirk could make it convenient to call upon her at his earliest opportunity. Curiosity prompted me to turn to Debrett's baronetage in Raymond's bookcase, and from it I discovered that her ladyship was the wife of Sir Henry Pierrepoint Lane, a wealthy landowner and the patron of several livings in Yorkshire and Shropshire, whose principal seat was Atworth in Wiltshire. His wife was the eldest daughter of General Sir Charles Nayland, late of the Indian Army. Having reread the short paragraph in baronetage, which gave me a facsimile of the coat of arms upon the envelope, I sipped my tea and then wrote a short note regretting my absence from home, and stating my intention to call upon the following morning at 11 o'clock. This I dispatched by boy messenger. Hence it was that next morning, when I passed down Stanhope Street and turned into Gloucestershire Gardens, I felt in no mood to humour and sympathize with the whims and imaginary maladies of a fashionable patient. With a feeling of irritation and low spirits, I mounted the steps of the house in Gloucestershire Square and inquired for my new patient. I was ushered into a pretty morning-room, and shortly afterwards there entered a slim, youngish-looking woman, not exactly handsome, but of refined appearance, dark, with hair well coiled by an expert maid, and wearing a simple dress of pearl-grey cashmere, which clung about her form and showed it to distinct advantage. Before she had greeted me, I saw that she was a type subject to nerve storms, perhaps with a craving for stimulants after the reaction. "Good morning, doctor," she exclaimed, crossing the room and greeting me pleasantly. "I received your note last night. You were absent each time I called." "Yes," I responded. "I was called out to an urgent case and compelled to remain." "Does that happen often in your profession?" she asked, sinking into the chair opposite me. "If it does, I fear that doctors' wives must have an uncomfortable time. Your housekeeper was quite concerned about you." "But when one is a bachelor as I am, absence is not of any great moment," I laughed. At that moment her dark, brilliant eyes met mine, and I fancied I detected a strange look in them. "Well," she said with some hesitation, "I am very glad you have come at last, doctor, for I want to consult upon you a secret and a very serious matter concerning myself, and to obtain your opinion." "I shall be most happy to give you whatever advice lies in my power," I responded, assuming an air of professional gravity, and preparing myself to listen to her symptoms. "What is the nature of your ailment?" I inquired. "Well," she answered, "I can scarcely describe it. I seem in perpetually low spirits, although I have no cause whatever to be sad, and further there is a matter which troubles me exceedingly. I hardly like to confess it, but of late I have developed a terrible craving for stimulants." I put to her a number of questions which it is unnecessary here to recount, and found her exactly as I had supposed, a bundle of nerves. "But this unaccountable craving for stimulants is most remarkable," she went on. "I am naturally a most temperate woman, but nowadays I feel that I cannot live without having a recourse to brandy or some other spirit." "Sometimes you feel quite well and strong, then suddenly you experience a sensation of being extremely ill?" I suggested. "Exactly. How do you account for it?" "The feeling of strength and vigor is not necessarily the outcome of actual strength, any more than is the feeling of weakness the necessary outcome of actual weakness," I responded. "A person may be weak to a degree, and the sands of life be almost run out, and yet feel overwhelmingly strong and exuberantly happy. And on the other hand, when in sound and vigorous health, he may feel exhausted and depressed. Feelings, especially so with women of the better class, rise into being in connexation with the nervous system. Whether a person feels well or ill depends upon the structure of his nervous system and the way in which it is played upon. For, like a musical instrument, it may be made to give forth gay music or sad. "But is not my case remarkable?" she asked. "Not at all," I responded. "Then you think you can treat me and prevent me from becoming a dipsomaniac?" she asked eagerly. "Certainly," I replied. "I've no doubt that this craving can be removed by proper treatment. I will write you a prescription." "Ah," she exclaimed with a sigh. "You doctors with your serums and the like can nowadays inoculate against almost every disease. Would that you could give us women an immune from that deadly ailment so common among my sex, and so often very fatal." "What ailment?" I asked, rather surprised at her sudden and impetuous speech. "That of love," she responded in a low, strained voice, the voice of a woman desperate.